The first time my encrypted NSA terminal short-circuited, I thought it was just bad weather. The second time, I assumed maybe a neighbor's new security system was causing interference. But the third time, when a red banner flashed across my screen reading "Security Breach. Unauthorized signal intrusion," I knew someone had screwed up royally. I just didn't expect it to be the HOA, and I definitely didn't expect to find a glowing Wi-Fi tower bolted onto my roof like it belonged there. As I stared up at the blinking antenna, still steaming from fresh weld marks and haphazard wiring, one thought echoed in my mind. Karen from the HOA had no idea she'd just hijacked an active federal cyber intelligence line. And she had no clue the guy whose roof she used was the one who wrote the system's intrusion detection protocols. My name's Ian Delaney. Professionally, I'm just a remote network consultant, the kind of guy who works in pajama pants and knows how to bypass two-factor authentication in his sleep. But officially, I'm an NSA-level cybersecurity agent stationed under civilian cover. My job is to monitor digital threats that come too close to national networks and protect the fragile dance between privacy and chaos. I moved into this peaceful suburb a year ago thinking it would be the perfect low-profile base of operations. Boy, was I wrong. It started a week ago when my usual 3 p.m. security audit disconnected halfway through a secure packet transfer. I didn't think much of it. My system had redundancies, backups, and fail-safes. Any interruption would autocorrect in seconds. But it didn't. I rebooted everything, ran diagnostics, and still the interference remained. I checked the neighborhood spectrum. It was lit up like a Christmas tree. Somehow, a brand-new high-powered router was transmitting signals directly into my bandwidth range. That wasn't just odd, it was virtually impossible. My system operated on a federally protected subfrequency not accessible to consumer tech, which meant either someone had found a way to fake the frequency, or they had plugged into something they never should have touched. The next morning, I climbed onto my roof, curious to inspect my satellite dish. Instead, I found a thick, freshly installed pole bolted through my shingles and flashing. Mounted at the top was a gray Wi-Fi antenna, blinking like it belonged to NASA. It had cables running through my attic vent and, judging by the heavy-duty drill marks, whoever installed it wasn't gentle. I stood there frozen for a full minute, mouth open, trying to process what I was seeing. No warning. No notice. Just a tower on my roof. Someone was going to regret this. I didn't have to wait long. Less than an hour later, there was a knock on the door. It was Karen. Mid-50s, blonde bob haircut, polo shirt with the HOA logo embroidered on the left chest, clipboard in one hand, fake smile in the other. She walked up like she owned the place, which, apparently, she thought she did. "Hi Ian," she chirped. "You may have noticed the new community signal tower we installed yesterday. It's part of our digital enhancement initiative. Faster internet for everyone." She didn't even pause to check my reaction. "Your house has great elevation and line of sight, so we chose it as the main node. The board approved it last week." I blinked. "Karen, you installed a communications device on my roof without permission." She chuckled dismissively. "It's not like it hurts anything. It's just Wi-Fi, sweetie." "On a protected private residence," I repeated flatly. Karen's eyes narrowed, her smile tightening. "Well, technically, the HOA bylaws allow for minor structural adjustments if they benefit the community. And roof space isn't specifically addressed. Besides, if you have a problem, you can take it up at the next HOA meeting. In the meantime, please don't touch the equipment, it's very sensitive." She turned and strutted away before I could say another word. I stood at the doorway stunned, staring after her like she'd just thrown a pie at the Pentagon. That tower wasn't just sensitive. It was a threat, one that had already triggered a red alert on a federal surveillance monitor. I went back inside, locked the door, and pulled the blinds. The moment I powered up my workstation, I activated a secondary terminal, the one hidden behind a bookcase and camouflaged to look like a router. It connected directly to NSA Secure Cloud. I ran a full network trace on the new tower. Not only was it siphoning signal through my home's electric shielding, it was rerouting the entire neighborhood's traffic through a series of open, unsecured ports that weren't just vulnerable, but actively logging metadata. The icing on the cake? The logs were being uploaded to a cloud server registered under a name I recognized from Karen's smug Facebook post. Her nephew, Tyler, a wannabe tech entrepreneur who once bragged about building a neighborhood-wide surveillance net, in a LinkedIn article that got 2 likes and a public backlash. Tyler had sold Karen and the board on the idea of free HOA Wi-Fi. But instead of using proper infrastructure or permits, he took the shortcut. Slap a tower on the nearest roof, wire it into existing power lines, and boom, instant network. It wasn't just illegal. It was reckless, dangerous, and more importantly, directly interfering with classified federal work. As I mapped out the data flow, I saw something even worse. The tower wasn't just transmitting, it was receiving pings from remote sources, packet injections. There was a script running live that was scanning connected devices for vulnerabilities. Someone had installed spyware on a network flowing through my roof. I leaned back, my heart pounding, already typing the emergency encryption protocols. This wasn't just some suburban mishap. This was a federal cybercrime, and I had front row seat. Before I filed a formal incident report to my NSA handler, I needed proof. Something undeniable. So I did what any good cybersecurity agent would do. I baited the hook. I created 2 fake files, one labeled NSA Drone Deployment Roster and the other Federal Payroll Audit 2025, and placed them on a cloned virtual drive mimicking the data stream Tyler's tower had access to. Then I waited. Within 3 hours, both files had been opened. I leaned forward, staring at the access logs. Karen's IP address, Tyler's cloud account, timestamps aligned perfectly. Game over. I cracked my knuckles, leaned back, and whispered, "Karen, you picked the wrong nerd to mess with." Then I reached for the phone and placed a call that would change the entire future of the HOA. The next morning, I sat at my workstation sipping bitter black coffee, watching the data stream from the rooftop tower like it was a bomb waiting to go off. My bait files had been accessed again overnight. Not downloaded, read. Someone was probing the content without taking copies, which meant they weren't amateurs. Most hackers snatch and run. This was someone analyzing, observing, trying to figure out how deep they could go without setting off alarms. I had news for them. The alarms were already blaring behind a one-way NSA firewall, and every keystroke was being logged in a federal database. I traced the source again and confirmed what I'd seen before. The files had been accessed via Karen's home IP, but rerouted through a VPN registered under Tyler's name. That punk thought he was clever, setting up a cloak with some offshore proxy servers. But he didn't realize the VPN was leaking DNS queries like a faucet, and I could still pinpoint his physical location down to the room in Karen's guest house. The digital fingerprints were everywhere. Tyler had essentially broken into a government intelligence system, and Karen had handed him the key by letting him use my roof like a tech playground. Outside, the sun was shining like it had no idea a storm was building. I stepped onto my front porch and saw a few neighbors walking their dogs, blissfully unaware their smart fridges and baby monitors were likely feeding into Tyler's data mine. One guy waved. I waved back, forcing a polite smile. For now, I couldn't say anything. If I made this public before I had all the evidence, Karen would spin it like I was some tinfoil hat conspiracy theorist. No, this needed to be airtight, indisputable. I needed them caught in the act with no exit. By noon, I activated a subroutine that mapped all traffic flowing through the tower. I was stunned to see how wide the net stretched. Over 24 households were unknowingly connected. Every phone, laptop, smart thermostat, even one poor soul's insulin monitor, was pinging back to Tyler's server farm. And it wasn't just metadata. Someone had begun recording screen captures, live feeds from unsecured devices. Tyler had built more than just a community network. He'd created a full-blown neighborhood spy ring. But the question still lingered. Why? Selling data? Blackmail? Curiosity? It didn't matter. Intent was irrelevant when the law had already been broken 6 different ways. Still, I had to know the scale. I set up a ghost protocol, essentially a backdoor into his backdoor, and siphoned a mirror of his storage server. It was worse than I imagined. Folder after folder labeled by house numbers. Some had benign content like Netflix watch histories, but others held bank logins, private messages, and even audio recordings. At that point, the case had crossed from cybercrime into civil rights violation. Karen had greenlit something that stripped every neighbor of their digital dignity. I ran the compiled intel through the NSA's pre-indictment framework. The system tagged it with a high-priority risk score, meaning my next step would be reporting it formally. But before I could send it up the chain, there was a knock on the door. Not a light tap, 3 loud bangs, the kind that carried entitlement. I already knew who it was. Karen stood on my porch again, this time flanked by 2 younger guys in neon orange vests with HOA patrol stitched onto them like it meant something. She gave me that smile again, the kind that said she was about to do something petty and enjoy it. "We received a complaint," she began, voice syrupy. "You were seen tampering with the community equipment on your roof. That tower is HOA property now. Any interference could result in fines or a temporary loss of internet access for everyone." I raised an eyebrow. "You mean the tower illegally installed without my permission?" Karen's smile didn't waver. "It was voted in by board consensus. That makes it a sanctioned upgrade." "I don't remember voting," I said. "Well, not everyone participates," she snapped, then softened again. "Anyway, these gentlemen will be doing a quick inspection to make sure nothing's been modified." One of the so-called inspectors stepped forward, trying to look official in his reflective vest and clipboard. I didn't budge. "Nobody's coming in." Karen looked genuinely shocked. "You don't get to refuse an inspection." "Oh, I do," I said, stepping closer. "Because this isn't a rental. This is my privately owned home. You don't have legal jurisdiction here, and unless you're holding a warrant signed by a judge, you're trespassing." Karen's face began to flush. "This is going to reflect poorly on you when the board reviews your conduct. I'm not the one illegally installing surveillance hardware on someone else's roof," I said coolly. "So maybe you should think about how that's going to reflect on you." The 2 inspectors looked uncomfortable, clearly not expecting to be challenged. Karen gritted her teeth, threw me one last death glare, and marched off without another word. I watched them retreat and immediately checked my cameras. As expected, one of the guys tried to take a picture of my window as they passed. I tagged it, saved the footage, and added it to the report. Once they were out of sight, I finally hit send. The full package, network maps, file access logs, IP tracebacks, video evidence, and mirrored data archives, went straight to my NSA handler with a Level 2 civilian breach classification. A response came within minutes. I was instructed to continue covert observation while a federal warrant was prepared for digital seizure and arrest. But my handler also warned me not to escalate unless there was an immediate threat. In other words, don't scare the Karen, not yet. That night, I watched the signal tower from my kitchen window, glowing faintly against the stars like a sentinel for stupidity. It buzzed occasionally, casting eerie shadows on the roofline. I thought about taking a baseball bat to it right then and there, but no. This wasn't about revenge. It was about precision. Justice would come, but it would come professionally, surgically, with the kind of force that Karen and Tyler wouldn't see coming until the knock on their door shattered their perfect little HOA bubble. The day after I submitted the full report, the calm in the neighborhood felt artificial. The wind rustled the hedges and the birds chirped like nothing was wrong, but I knew better. Behind the scenes, a storm was brewing, and I was its quiet architect. My NSA handler had acknowledged the breach and greenlit surveillance continuation while federal agents prepared to act. But things were escalating faster than even I expected. At 9:14 a.m., I received a ping on my decoy node. Someone was inside the honeypot server I'd set up to track intrusion behavior. They weren't just poking around anymore. They were scraping directories, scanning protocols, and attempting privilege escalation. Someone was getting greedy. I didn't need to guess who it was. Tyler had obviously taken Karen's blind confidence as a green light to dig deeper. But what he didn't realize was that every attempt was tripping alarms I had installed days ago. His browser fingerprint, mouse movements, keystroke intervals, all cataloged. I even caught him trying to open a folder labeled Project Javelin, which was nothing but an infinite loop of Rick Astley music videos. The trap wasn't just set, it was snapping shut. While I monitored the logs, I also decided it was time to look into Karen's deeper involvement. If she was simply a clueless pawn, things might end with a slap on the wrist. But if she had knowingly enabled Tyler, or worse, was benefiting from the surveillance, then things were about to get nuclear. I spoofed her email client using cached header data and accessed her recent communication history through packet sniffing. What I found surprised even me. Karen had been bragging about the new Wi-Fi system to an entire Facebook group of HOA officials from across the state. She wrote about cutting-edge surveillance enhancements, data-backed community discipline, and even mentioned selling anonymized metadata to advertisers to fund HOA events. My jaw tightened. This wasn't just Tyler freelancing with some shady code. This was Karen actively monetizing illegal surveillance while pitching it as neighborhood innovation. There was also a forwarded email chain between Karen and a local realtor. In it, she offered access to traffic and demographic data on potential buyers. Details like which houses visitors walked past most, who stayed longest at open houses, and even patterns in family activity. She had effectively turned the neighborhood into a testing ground for predictive real estate targeting. And somehow, she didn't see this as deeply illegal. Just smart marketing. I archived everything and created a full threat dossier. Then, I decided to tighten the net further. I used a virtual assistant bot to schedule a fake appointment with Karen for a new neighborhood resident who had questions about internet access. I wanted to see if she'd pitch her system again, see what lies she'd tell when she didn't know she was being recorded. The appointment was set for 2:30 p.m. at the HOA clubhouse. As the clock approached 2 o'clock, I parked down the street in my car, where I had line-of-sight surveillance of the front office. I watched through a tiny HD lens embedded in a pair of sunglasses perched on the dash. At 2:28, a man I hired from a local task agency showed up, dressed in casual clothes, pretending to be new in town. He was wired and briefed to play dumb. The moment he walked in, I turned up the audio feed. Karen's voice came through clearly. "You're gonna love this community. We take pride in being ahead of the curve, technologically speaking." Then she went into the pitch. She explained how the community Wi-Fi worked, mentioned Tyler by name as their network specialist, and even described how they could track roaming devices to make sure visitors weren't loitering. She said it with pride, like she was offering concierge-level service rather than casually violating the Fourth Amendment. When my decoy agent asked if homeowners could opt out, she laughed. "Oh no, no one's opted out. It's baked into the HOA agreement now. Besides, only people who have something to hide worry about that kind of thing." I stopped the recording there. I didn't need anything else. She had incriminated herself more effectively than I ever could. Within the hour, I uploaded the audio to the case file and attached it with the updated violation report. I knew it was enough, but part of me wanted her to feel it, just a little, before the hammer dropped. That evening, I walked my usual route through the neighborhood with my hood up and AirPods in, pretending to listen to music. I passed Karen's house. Her blinds were drawn, but lights flickered behind them. Tyler's Jeep was parked in the driveway. I knew what they were doing. Scrambling. Probably arguing. They'd seen strange signals on their end, maybe noticed the honey trap files, maybe even guessed someone was onto them. But they had no idea just how bad it was about to get. At exactly 8:47 p.m., my NSA terminal pinged with a high-priority update. A federal warrant had been approved for data seizure, equipment confiscation, and arrests for conspiracy to violate privacy laws and illegal interception of protected networks. The warrant also granted a silent operation window, meaning the targets wouldn't be informed until agents arrived on site. That window opened at midnight. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the blinking tower one last time through my bedroom window. Its steady blink had become a symbol of everything wrong with forced control and fake authority. Karen and Tyler thought they had outsmarted everyone. They believed being in charge of a local board gave them the right to bypass ethics, legality, and common decency. But they forgot that behind every polite neighbor's smile, there might be someone like me, someone who doesn't play by their little HOA rules. The countdown had begun. 4 hours to go. I watched the terminal like a conductor awaiting the start of the final act. By morning, the neighborhood would wake up to flashing lights, silence, and a hole in the sky where that tower used to be. At exactly midnight, the air felt different. Still, like everything was holding its breath. The neighborhood was silent except for the occasional cricket, and even they seemed hesitant. I sat in my home office, all systems live, coffee untouched. The federal task force was en route. Black SUVs with 0 markings, agents in plain clothes, equipment ready for silent extraction. They weren't coming with sirens or a battering ram, they were coming like a ghost, swift and precise. The warrant granted them entry to Karen's home, Tyler's guesthouse workspace, and the HOA office itself. My job now was just to observe and provide live intel if anything shifted. But part of me wanted to step out there and witness the exact moment Karen's paper crown shattered. At 12:27 a.m., the convoy rolled in. 3 unmarked vehicles, headlights off, made a quiet turn onto our main street. They didn't stop like normal visitors. They moved with intention, parking right in front of Karen's property and fanning out instantly. 2 agents went around the back. One stayed by the Jeep. Another knocked gently, no urgency, just a firm tap that said the person on the other side didn't have a choice. I switched to my exterior cam feed and watched the moment Karen opened her door, confused in a robe and slippers. The lead agent handed her a sealed document. She tried to speak, but he raised a hand calmly. Seconds later, they entered the house. Tyler wasn't as cooperative. He was seen trying to yank cables from a monitor and stuff a laptop into a duffel bag when agents breached his guest room. One of them calmly stepped forward and retrieved the bag like they were plucking groceries from a cart. Tyler screamed about privacy, screamed about needing a lawyer, but none of it mattered. The devices were tagged and secured. Anything with a signal emitter was locked into a Faraday cage on the spot. They weren't just taking the hardware. They were wiping the entire network that had been leeching off the neighborhood for weeks. Down the street, a second group entered the HOA office using a master key obtained during the warrant process. Inside, they recovered the routers, backup drives, a server tower disguised as a filing cabinet, and multiple folders of handwritten notes, Karen's personal planning logs for what she'd called digital morality enforcement. The phrase made my skin crawl. She'd scribbled details about individual homeowners, comments about their guests, late-night habits, even preferences in online shopping. It was surveillance mixed with judgment, all under the label of community order. I didn't sleep. I just watched. When the last of the agents departed around 2:53 a.m., Karen's house was dark again, but this time it felt hollow. The tower on my roof had gone dark 10 minutes earlier, deactivated by remote command and physically disconnected at the source. A tech from the team had left a note in my mailbox with a smiley face and a simple thank you. They knew who I was, knew what I'd done. But the operation would stay under wraps. No public headlines, no press releases, yet. The consequences would come in waves, each more personal than the last. By 7 a.m., the neighborhood was already buzzing. Residents noticed the missing tower, the stripped-down HOA office, the fact that Karen's blinds hadn't opened like clockwork. No one had seen her walk her dog, no clipboard-toting strolls, no smug rounds to scold someone for leaving a trash bin out. Something was wrong, and everyone felt it. By 9 a.m., whispers turned into questions, and by noon, my inbox was flooded with forwarded emails from concerned neighbors. Karen had resigned from the HOA board with a vague one-line email stating personal health reasons. Tyler's Jeep was gone, and someone had seen him being escorted away late at night. Rumors spun fast, but none were wild enough to touch the truth. Later that afternoon, the interim HOA president sent out a mass email announcing a temporary suspension of the community Wi-Fi initiative due to unforeseen technical issues. It was the kind of sugar-coated language that tried to pretend no one had just watched a digital coup dismantled overnight. But people knew something was off. A few came to my door asking what happened. I just smiled and said, "I think the internet got a little too smart for its own good." They laughed, but they left with more questions than they arrived with. By the third day, the cracks were impossible to hide. Parents started asking why their kids' devices had strange alerts. One man discovered his webcam had been active at odd hours. Another found out his bank login had been accessed from an unknown location the week prior. The community realized slowly, painfully, that they'd been watched. Every click, every message, every online search had passed through a poisoned wire. And that realization sparked fury. A town hall was called the following weekend. It was packed. People stood shoulder to shoulder in the small HOA hall, demanding answers. But Karen wasn't there. Tyler was gone. No one wanted to take responsibility. That's when I stepped forward. I didn't reveal everything. Just enough. I explained the nature of the tower, the data funneling, the unauthorized surveillance. I didn't mention the NSA, didn't mention federal warrants. Just showed the community what had been done to them, and who had benefited. There was silence. Then an uproar. Some people cried. Others shouted. One elderly woman walked up to the microphone and said she'd never felt more violated in her life. She'd used that network to FaceTime her grandchildren. And now she wondered who might have been watching. That was the turning point. The board was disbanded unanimously that night, every member stepping down in shame or self-preservation. Karen's name was voted into permanent suspension from future HOA roles. The bylaws were rewritten on the spot. As for me, I was asked if I'd consider helping the new committee secure the neighborhood's digital infrastructure. I declined politely. I said I worked in tech but preferred privacy. It was close enough to the truth. I offered them a checklist of best practices and a list of trusted vendors. Then I went home and shut the door behind me. That night, I stood on my back deck, sipping a cold drink under the stars. The tower was gone. The roof was patched. Peace had returned, but I knew better than to expect it to last. There's always someone out there who thinks control equals safety. Someone who sees rules as something for other people. But as long as there are watchers, there will be people like me watching them back. I didn't choose that role, but I sure as hell wouldn't let people like Karen choose for me again. 2 weeks passed, and the neighborhood returned to a quieter rhythm. The air felt clearer without the silent hum of that tower lurking overhead. Karen's house remained closed off, blinds drawn, mailbox overflowing. Tyler's Jeep never reappeared. The gossip gradually faded, replaced by more immediate concerns like fence repairs, overgrown hedges, and which homes needed exterior paint touch-up. But underneath that normalcy, something had shifted. People started asking more questions, paying more attention to the devices they used, the permissions they allowed, the networks they trusted. It was a neighborhood forced into digital maturity by betrayal, and oddly enough, it felt like progress. The official fallout came quietly but decisively. Karen was charged on 3 counts of unlawful surveillance, 2 counts of wire fraud, and 1 very serious charge of tampering with federally protected communications. Tyler was slapped with an even heavier list, intent to defraud, computer intrusion, unauthorized interception, and a conspiracy charge that would stick like cement. The court kept most of it sealed from public view to avoid panic, but a handful of residents, especially those whose private footage had been compromised, were granted access to the case summary. Some cried when they read it. Others demanded more. A few simply shut down their internet and never turned it back on. Karen entered a guilty plea in exchange for a reduced sentence, choosing probation, fines, and permanent restriction from any community leadership role over prison time. Tyler, on the other hand, wasn't so lucky. His lawyer tried to paint him as a misunderstood tech prodigy, but the logs were undeniable. He was sentenced to a federal penitentiary with no parole for a minimum of 6 years. The judge didn't even blink. The damage he had done to public trust, especially by tapping into a classified infrastructure, was too great to forgive. I watched the hearing remotely. When Tyler was led away in cuffs, he looked around the courtroom like he was still trying to figure out where it all went wrong. The next board election came quickly after the old guard resigned. This time, the community demanded full transparency. No more unannounced projects, no more hidden surveillance, and certainly no more towers bolted onto private homes. People were paranoid now, and rightly so. Cameras came down. Wi-Fi routers were replaced. And during the first meeting of the newly elected board, a motion was passed unanimously to form a privacy oversight committee. It was symbolic, maybe, but it was something. They asked me to join. Again I declined. I told them I preferred being left alone, that I wasn't interested in HOA politics. But I gave them something else. A copy of a guide I'd written on secure community networks, anonymized and simplified. It walked them through how to protect themselves, how to recognize suspicious activity, and how to avoid ever falling into another Karen-sized mess. I didn't sign it. I didn't want the credit. I just wanted peace. For a time I got it. I repaired the roof where the tower had once stood and replaced the shingles myself. It was slow work, but oddly satisfying. A few neighbors offered to help, but I politely refused. I didn't need a team. I needed silence, clarity, control. And when I was done, I installed a small vegetable garden on the flat section, raised beds, solar watering, fully offline. No sensors, no Wi-Fi, just dirt and growth. Something pure. Something honest. One evening, about a month after the fallout, I was walking back from the hardware store when I noticed someone new moving into the vacant house 3 doors down. A young couple, maybe late 20s, with a baby and a golden retriever. They looked like the exact kind of people Karen used to target with HOA letters. Too casual, too loud, too free. The man waved at me and smiled as he unloaded a box labeled router setup. He asked if the community Wi-Fi still worked. I almost laughed. I told him he'd be better off setting up his own network, that the last one had some issues. He thanked me and went back to work, completely unaware that the stranger down the street had once watched the entire HOA implode from behind a keyboard. Later that night, I walked around the block, something I did now out of habit more than routine. The stars were out, crisp and bright. No towers, no buzzing, no silent watchers. Just streetlights and shadows and the occasional flicker of a porch lamp. When I passed Karen's old house, I noticed something odd, movement in the backyard. At first I tensed, thinking maybe Tyler had come back, but when I zoomed in through my glasses' embedded lens, I saw it was a realtor, taking final photos before listing the property. A small wooden sign had already gone up at the curb. For sale. No mention of what had happened here. Just a price and a smiling face on a brochure. I continued walking, more at peace now. It wasn't about revenge anymore. Karen and Tyler had been removed, their plans dismantled, their confidence shattered. But more importantly, the community had learned. They had woken up to the truth of what modern control looks like, what surveillance feels like when it comes from the people who claim to protect you. That was enough for me. When I got home, I sat in my office and opened my secure terminal. The NSA hadn't contacted me since the takedown, but my credentials remained valid. I still ran quiet assessments, maintained dormant listening tools, and kept my systems sharp. Because people like Karen weren't anomalies. They were symptoms. There would always be another one. Somewhere else. Some new community. Some new tower. And I would be ready. As I sipped a fresh cup of coffee and glanced at the map of flagged cyber incidents nationwide, I marked one strange uptick in a remote town in Colorado. Nothing confirmed. Just noise. But I flagged it. Tagged it for review. Then I closed the interface and looked out my window, watching the wind move through my rooftop garden. Somewhere out there, someone else like me was watching a tower blink in the night, wondering how deep it went. And someone else like Karen was smiling to themselves, thinking no one would notice. But someone always notices.